Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Cauldron chat within the Cauldron Glow podcast. Tonight we have a special guest. Christopher Penczack will be joining us. He is the co-founder of the Temple of Witchcraft. He is also written a vast amount of spiritual, pagan, witchcraft-related books. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in.
Welcome in, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so before we begin, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everyone. So, of course, you guys see Christopher Penczack. He is going to be our guest this evening. And then we have a few different co-hosts as well as a special co-host tonight. So we have Chrissy and then Nico and Silver Dragon Hawk. He is part of our spiritual family, and we thought that it would be great to have him join in tonight. So let's go ahead and dive in.
And
Christopher, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, John, first question.
Tired. First question that we have for Christopher is, what was your journey like when you wrote your first book?
Oh, well, my very first book never got published. That's something I don't talk about too often. My first book was on astrological magic. And it was a monstrously large book and probably too much for a first-time author. And I sent it to many people and got many rejection letters, but I got a really encouraging rejection letter from Wiser. And I found out many years later that the head of Wiser at the time was a woman named Betty Lundstedt, who's an astrology author as well. She would write back under different names. And the name she wrote under was sort of code for if you called back looking for her, or looking for somebody, of whether they liked your book and it just wasn't the right fit, or whether you were a crazy person, they don't want to deal with you, or you seem dangerous or something like that. And so I later found out she used the good code word for me, and she just wrote this really kind of encouraging email that said I had great stuff, but it was just too much for a first-time author, and if you wrote something else, we'd be really interested in it. And she actually was the one to sign my first published book, which was City Magic. Yeah, so it's a fun thing. I don't really talk about that too often. So it was originally called Universal Magic, and I sort of think of it like my grad thesis before doing this professionally. So it had like tons of research, and I cut it up to be a bunch of classes when I first started teaching publicly, and it was a good experiment. I think, sometimes people rush to get published really quickly, and I had a lot of time to digest my ideas and to, really figure out what I wanted to say and practice teaching in front of people before I became an author. So I'm very blessed that she said no to that book, even though it seems kind of weird to be thankful about getting a no, but I think it turned out to be good in the end.
Wow.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I think it's, at times we forget, like a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I feel like I've heard it commonly within like the witchcraft pagan circles where, everyone kind of strives at some point to publish their knowledge that they've amassed over time. And to hear, like someone like you, who I consider kind of a shelf staple when it comes to witchcraft, spirituality related topics, it's interesting, to know that your beginning wasn't quite just easy flowing, that you had some moments of going back and being like, oh man, what do I do now?
Yeah, it was publishing was a different world then. A lot of people, you'd send it out to all the masses. This was like, printed books. It wasn't e-submissions on email. Like email was just starting out at that time. And then you'd have to wait weeks and weeks, if not months. Wiser took, even having that opening and having that person interested in my work and having that previous contact, they still took 11 months to get back to me for that first book. And today people get really upset if they don't hear back in 3 weeks. And I had a friend that was trying to get published, and he's like, it's been 2 weeks, I haven't heard back from them. I'm like, man, you just chill out. It took me 11 months to get something. And even then they wouldn't always offer contracts right away. They'd want changes, they'd want this, they'd want that. So publishing was really different. But for people who get upset about rejection, I often like to say between that and City Magic, both Universal Magic and City Magic probably got around 25 to 30 rejection letters each to all the publishers. So if you've gotten rejected from someplace, don't. And even, believe it or not, if we want to talk rejections and everything, so some folks at Wiser were a little salty when I went to Llewellyn. And I had to inform them, because they were kind of a new generation of the company, that Wiser actually rejected the Temple series. And so that's why I went to Llewellyn. So, you never know, and people have strong feelings of what they think will be a hit and what won't be a hit, or, what's out there. So I always just like to share that, because if people are discouraged because they got a rejection letter, I mean, try getting a stack load and just kind of keep going. If you have confidence that you have something to do and say and share, you'll find the right audience for it. And you'll find the right people who want to partner with you for it.
Oh, wow. It's awesome, though. I mean, the persistence, that's a lot of dedication to really like put that information out there. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Nick, guess you got the next question, hon?
Yep. Which book did you enjoy writing the most, and why?
Oh, I think that changes over time. I think it depends on, what day it is, or where I'm at, or what I'm struggling with. I would say the book that probably has me as the most excitement to it is The 3 Rays of Witchcraft, because that really changed the direction of my world. That really became the foundation of a lot of the unique things that went into the Temple of Witchcraft community. And it was such an odd book for me. Like, normally I have an idea and I teach a class, and then after a couple of years of teaching the class, I write the book for it, and I have lots of student stories and things like that for it. And the 3 rays really came, I hate using the word because it's overused these days, but when people talk about receiving a download, it was really like in meditation, getting that very specific symbol that showed up on the cover. And then from that kind of unfolding and unpacking. So the initial first draft of the 3 rays was probably done in a little over 2 weeks. Because it was just so much information was sort of coming through, and it wasn't really a researched book. I went back to kind of fill in some things historically, but so much of it was kind of personal gnosis and experiential to it. So I'd probably say that one is the one that is my favorite, or the one that was the most moving and life-changing for me.
Wow. That is a lot of, I mean, just to even think about like getting that much information and then just being able to really just like, put the pen to paper, or, start typing and really just get that information out there.
Yeah, I would say my family would describe me at that time as being on fire. I was really on fire and had to get it out. Like, it was imperative. I kind of dropped everything in my life just to get that first draft done. And I sat on it for a while and worked on it in different ways and things like that. And that was kind of when I was making the transition from kind of mainstream publishing, and we just started Cauldron. That was the first book that we put through Cauldron. And I was sort of pulling back from teaching and traveling so much to focus on building a temple here and getting the kind of nonprofit paperwork set and everything. And it really became the foundation spiritually for all the community work that we did. But it was a lot of change and a lot of intensity.
So kind of the flip side of that question, which book, and I don't want to say necessarily like publishing, but like which book did you struggle with the most? And like, how did you overcome those obstacles?
I'd say some of the bigger books that aren't out yet, I've probably struggled with the most. Some of my releases that are coming out, just because they've turned to be really massive volumes. I have a book coming out on kind of an alchemical view of Cauldron that has been this labor of love that I feel like I've been working on for 10 years. And it's just, as the world changed and COVID happened and paper prices shifted and, all those things that happen in publishing, it sort of took a back seat, and I focused on some other things. So that was a bit of a struggle, although I love the final product of it, and we're having the art complete this month, and hopefully it'll be out soon next year. I would say the other books that I struggled with, ironically, talking about publishing and rejections and things like that, the ones that my publisher asked me to write, as opposed to the ones that I had the clearest idea about. And not that I'm not proud of those books too, because I think I did a good job with what I was asked to, but in my days at Llewellyn, they had a contest for teens, and all these teens wrote in, and they were shocked that the vast majority of the teens writing in were boys, because they thought, oh, it's witchcraft, it's going to be girls. And they were shocked at the high volume of those boys who were gay. And they're just like, oh, I feel like this is like, so we need to speak to this group of people. And they asked me to write a book that was specifically aimed for young men. And that was Sons of the Goddess. And I'm very happy with that book, but it was a bit of a struggle because I'll admit, outside of community stuff and, kind of building ministry things, I'm not a great collaborator. I have a vision, and this is the vision I want to do. And I'm happy when I'm working with other people. If you have a vision, I'll support that vision. And as time went on in the publishing world for me, you got more and more feedback of what the publisher wanted the book to be. And I don't do that super well. In fact, I tend to write a book completely before I contract it, which is very rare these days. Most people contract the book first. And I feel like if you have the book done, the publisher knows what it is. If they don't like it or they come back at you with all these changes, I'll just say, oh, you're not the place for me. But because I was writing it based on what they wanted to talk about, I felt like I got a lot more feedback in those books. So it was a little bit of a struggle, and it wasn't always my style. Like Sons of the Goddess had all these sidebars to kind of make it easier to read, so people could read just little blurbs of it, which was fun to learn how to do that, but that's not normally how I'd write. And then the other interesting one was Mystic Foundation. We wanted to write something that was not witchy, but really spoke to really the core mission I had for it was, imagine you go into a metaphysical shop, you don't know anything, and you wanted to ask the owner or the person behind the counter, what is this all about? What does it mean? They could hand you that book and say, you know, kind of overviews a lot of different spiritual traditions. So at heart, I'm kind of a universalist, and I see the wisdom in many different traditions. So I'm glad I wrote that book. But it was also a lot of kind of feedback of, you know, these are the things we want in the book, and these are the things we don't want in the book, and we don't want it to be too witchy, and we don't want it to scare people, and you know, things like that. So that was a little bit more of a struggle for me compared to just saying this is the book I want to write and take it or leave it. So those were some of my challenges in the book realm, publishing realm.
Pretty good. Any tips for teachers who have students that may have some issues connecting to learning the material that is being taught to them?
That is a great question. And we talk a lot about that in the Temple of Witchcraft, because we've got kind of a wide number of ways that we teach. And I teach a lot of things online right now, which is not always conducive. And honestly, as much as I do enjoy it because you get to reach people, teaching online is not my favorite thing. I'd rather have everybody be in front of me, but you know, we can't always do that. So we've talked a lot about different learning styles. So if you're a teacher that's fortunate enough to work with a smaller group, you can kind of accommodate different learning styles in different ways. Sometimes in ways I can't when I'm online because there's just so many students at that point. But figuring out what your style of education is, if you're an auditory person, if you're a sensory person, if you're a reading person, and sometimes there'll be requirements, you know, in material or in a tradition, you have to write this out, or you have to do this ritual or whatever that might not be comfortable for you. So be open to the challenge, but also figure out what are the ways, and kind of learn, and it sounds kind of trite right now, but learn how your brain works. So like some people learn better. The studies now that we and as an educator, I look at these things that will say, you know, some people memorize things better when there's music on in the background. I'm not one of those people, so I would never think to suggest that. So it took me educating myself to know that's a strategy for people. Or some people are better if they're physically doing something. If they're, you know, tapping their fingers, tapping their toes, things will kind of remember. Or if they're people who need to have a hard time memorizing things, having flashcards for stuff, that can be helpful. You know, but it's a lot of the school stuff that, you know, some of us learn depending on our generation. I know teaching styles are a little bit different these days, but figuring out the best way it is for you to learn, and hopefully that your teacher can adapt to it or can be present with you. And if they can't, how can you adapt the material on your own time to fit your learning style? Because like I know when I teach, I'm like, here's the lesson, read the lesson, we'll talk about it. You know, we'll have a little bit of a lecture to it. So if you're auditory, you can hear it. If you're visual, you can read it. Now we're going to do a ritual or meditation so you can experience it. So try to engage all the senses, but really figure out what works for you, because what works for me might not be what works for you.
Excellent. Yeah, we have a teaching coven, and I think that's the biggest issues is that some people just don't want to connect to what you're teaching. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I use a lot of metaphors. My background before this was art and music. So I use that example a lot. And for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. But like, if you're learning music, there's nothing more boring than having to play 3 hours of scales. Yet, if you learn music, you know, learning those scales will give you the coordination to play the piece of music you want to play that you're probably not going to get if you don't play those scales. And, you know, like in art lessons, I can remember having to do all these perspective, you know, exercises and, you know, line of points of things that a lot of people who just want to draw don't want to learn those things. And I get it, but I know now I don't consider myself a great artist by any stretch, but I can pull together something with good perspective even not really being fundamentally involved in drawing anymore because I've had those backgrounds, or I can frame a photo a little bit better because I understand perspective and color and things like that. So I try to tell people witchcraft is an art as well as a religion. I really, going back to Laurie Cabot, think it's the art, the science, and the religion. But the
Good.
art part of it, there's rules to the art, even if you don't want to, even if you just want to focus on the creativity, there's rules to those creativities. Once you know them, you can break it, but learn them as much as you can.
Right. John, you're up.
Do you have any tips for time management for those who may struggle to feel like they're not doing enough in their craft, or that have bad time management skills, so that they can't find, they struggle with finding time to meditate or do their daily devotionals, or other aspects of their craft?
Yeah, I will go back to that artist training again. So my music composition teacher would say, if you're a composer, put notes on paper every day. My writing mentors would say, if you're a writer, write down words, even if it's just a paragraph every day. If you're a witch, do magic every day. Doesn't have to be something big. If you're in a course that has requirements, that's something different. But if it's just in terms of your practice in a group or your practice at home, making the time to do a morning devotional. And if you can't do that, making the time to do a night devotional. If you can't do that, making a time in the midday to do a devotional. Planning too. For me, my schedule is crazy. And so putting things on the calendar and committing to them, and realizing that your spiritual commitments to yourself and your gods are just as important as anything else you put down in your calendar. So if I put down I'm doing a solitary moon ritual on the full moon, and somebody needs something from me, I treat that appointment just as I would treat if I had a client or I had a student. It doesn't mean if there's an emergency, hospital-wise, whatever, I wouldn't break that. But if it's not, someone's bleeding, someone's in jail, someone's in the hospital type of thing, I keep that appointment as if I had a client or if I had a student coming over. And then I'll deal with whatever needed to be done. But I won't. I think we have an effort often to sacrifice our own time, either to bad time management because we get stuck in things that we lose track of, or we're trying to help other people and we lose track of things and we think, oh, they're more important than we are, so my spirituality can take a back seat. But I think you need to practice, and I think you need to, even if it's just something little, try to do something every day and incorporating into your worldview. That little thing you might do might be zapping for your parking space when you're going shopping for your groceries. That little thing you might do would be, part of my altar devotional is getting ready in the morning. So putting on my jewelry, putting on my cologne, the idea of even brushing my teeth and looking myself in the mirror, those are all magical things for me. Even if I'm not with the candle and incense, I've still done magic. Even when I lay down at night, what's my kind of unwinding when I go to bed at night? And right now I'm doing this thing of the parts of the body through astrology. So I start at my feet, and in the name of Pisces, I bless my feet and then my ankles, and kind of go up my body and just sort of unwind my body and thank my body for the day and kind of keeping me together. And even if I do nothing else that day, I've taken 5 minutes while I'm lying in bed before I doze off to just kind of be esoteric because it's astrology, and be sacredly embodied because it's my body, and be gratitude wise and thankful for my health. And so just do some type of magic every day. Don't beat yourself up about it, but do some type of magic every day.
Cool.
That's awesome.
I love that. And we have a comment here from Lady Leslie.
Hey, Leslie.
I use a lot of your books as a reference tool, and it's helped me greatly over the years, always learning.
Leslie. Yay.
Right, and my question for you, let's see. How do you prevent yourself from getting burnt out during your busy season? You wear very many hats.
That is a great question. When I figure it out, I'll let you know. No, just kidding. Yeah, I feel like I've learned to handle burnout. Not to say I don't get tired over time. And I think coming out of the Samhain season is always a tiring time for a professional witch. Although I've learned to block out more time for myself. I've learned to block out more time to do walks in the woods and magical things that are not always structured. So it doesn't always have to be a circle, but it's time in nature and letting things kind of unfold. And I would say the number one thing that's helped me with burnout has been really delving deeper into magical and medicinal herbalism. So when I was studying herbalism, and I had a wonderful teacher who could see how tired I was getting, and at that time I was doing like 20 to 30-day book tours and traveling up and down the coasts and teaching a lot and just on all the time, which I'm an introvert at heart. I know everybody doesn't believe that, but I am an introvert at heart. um, and I was just really exhausted, and she started making me adrenal support tinctures and adrenal support teas and nervines to kind of unwind and things to nourish the nervous system. So between that and learning a little bit more about homeopathy, because I think magical people's, it's going to be a controversial thing I might say, but magical people's bodies don't really react the same way other people's bodies react. So you may notice in our world, a lot of our peers have more of the mysterious illnesses that the doctors can't quite put a finger on. And I think we're reacting to the things that we invoke and the energies we're working with. So working with some really spirited herbalists and flower essence people and homeopaths, having a homeopath really figure out what she called my vital remedy was really key. I was really sick early in my career. I contracted pneumonia, and I had it relapse again and again and again, to the point where I thought I was dying. I was insisting the doctor check me for some type of mysterious form of autoimmune disease or something like that, and they couldn't find anything. And they sort of thought I was a hypochondriac, but I couldn't function. And I eventually went to a homeopath, and she was bizarrely wonderful. And if you go to a homeopath, they ask you a lot of invasive questions, from ranging from your childhood to your bathroom experiences and diet and everything in between. And then she just looked at me, and I thought she had a nursing background, so I thought it'd be fairly clinical at that point. They even ask you things like, is it worse on your left side or your right side? Is it, worse when it's hot, when it's cold, or night or day, or things like that? And then she just looked at me and she goes, I don't really know what to do with you. I'm gonna have to dream on it. And I was like, okay, that's weird. She's like, come back tomorrow at this time and I'll have an answer for you. And she did. And at that time, I didn't really know Latin as well as I do now for botanical names. And she didn't really know outside of the Latin. So she offered me a remedy, and the remedy in homeopathy was known as datura. And I didn't know that, or it was stramonium, excuse me. And I knew it as datura. And the Latin name is Datura stramonium. And that actually is one of my power plants. But I didn't know about it being able to, because it's a poison, I would never have taken it, but it was able to be taken in a homeopathic form. And I took it, and I would say within that day and that first dose, I was 50% better. And within 3 days, I was 90% better. And within 7 days, it never came back again. And I went from thinking I was slowly dying of some mysterious illness to feeling good again and feeling like I could write again and teach again. So I know homeopathy is controversial for a lot of people because you can't really get the same results the way you can from clinical medicines. But I think if you have the right person, match you with the right remedy, and I think particularly for magically, vibrationally sensitive people, it is a miracle. And so that's really helped me with my burnout, my energy levels, and my overall health.
Oh yeah, and absolutely, like, if you need to combine them, do. Modern medicine is amazing. You'll see me, I'll take antibiotics, but if I can use herbal remedies for something, I'm going to do that. But if it's serious enough that I need Western medicine, we're going straight for that.
Yeah, if I break a bone, if I need a surgery, and even I was going to a naturopath for a while, and I said, and she had medical license, she was a doctor, and I said, I need somebody who's going to look me, because I can be crazy sometimes, and say, you need antibiotics, and prescribe me antibiotics. Or if I don't need antibiotics, I need someone who's not going to immediately go to antibiotics and will say, let's try this or let's do that. So I think it's a good balance for it, and it's figuring out what works for you. But I think particularly when you get into the mysterious illnesses where kind of the Western medicine gives up on, I think the energetic and the herbal can really be helpful.
Oh yeah. I agree, because I had a doctor, I have some horrible food allergies, and the doctor's like, well, besides avoiding the food, I want you to go start seeing an acupuncturist. And I had a lot of inflammation, and from what they had said, there was a lot of, I had too much fire. So they had to go through and rebalance. And I was 5 years with no serious reactions,
That's awesome.
no issues, and it was really cool. But absolutely, like, holistic medicine and herbal medicines are amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to see them reach a point to where we're, or return to a point where they're as easily accepted and, used as mainstream medicine is today. I'd like to see us get back to that balance.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember talking to somebody from Europe, and I was couching around how I would talk about herbal medicine and in conjunction with witchcraft, and he's like, "Yeah, here we just call that medicine." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. You're probably a little bit more in tune with these." He's like, "That's traditional medicine. Like that's just medicine." And I was like, "Okay." So it was funny to be reminded that we often think America's the most advanced, but I think sometimes we forget those parts.
Absolutely. Now, to kind of redirect us into some of the things that you're working on and up and coming, are you adding on to the temple series? I feel like I might have heard something, so I just kind of I wanted to address the.
That's another great
possibly
question.
writing it.
Yeah, so the original plan many moons ago was going to be originally it was a 5-book series, and then the last book got divided into 2 books. So the last one's The Living Temple of Witchcraft Volume 1 and Volume 2. And so we're now doing the 20th anniversary editions of those books. And so that's sort of how I kind of came back into the world of mainstream publishing in Llewellyn. And we have the first 4 out now with the anniversary editions, and then the 5th one is just gone to print, and the 6th one's with the editor. So I'm hoping early next year that will be ready to come out. And the sort of agreement was, if everything went really, really well, I would do the planned 7th one, which was supposed to be a grimoire of the temple tradition. And then the Book of Shadows and the work that we do in the temple and the online mystery school has become just so vast. I decided to kind of pare it down almost to like a sampler. So just have different rituals and symbols and things that we use in the community, in person and online, and the things that I didn't necessarily put the first time around in the book. Although the anniversary editions have a lot more of the community in them. Each book probably has an extra 20,000 words in it if you include the foreword too, the new foreword. So it takes little vignettes of things that were in the classes and kind of shares them with people so we can see what we've done with them. So I was, and I still am, planning to write kind of this sampler grimoire called The Key to the Temple of Witchcraft. And that was advertised in some of the coming soon lists in the early books at that time. I'm not sure if I'll be doing it with Llewellyn. I might put it out through Cauldron. So that's sort of where my plan is right now, because that material is just so close to my heart. I'd be a little hesitant to bring it to a place where I don't have full control over it.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm sorry, but that begs the question: will there be a anniversary edition of the Foundations of the Temple book?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know if we're probably at the 10-year mark for that book.
Yeah.
So maybe in 20 years, sure. Who knows? I have a plan. It's interesting to say that too. I didn't have a plan for a 20-year anniversary, even a 10-year anniversary edition of that book. But I do. So our temple, as it grows, has everything is sort of, although the books are divided into the 5 levels, the temple itself is just 3s everywhere. It's based on the 3 rays and all these kind of divisions of 3s. So the inner culture of the temple, without getting too abstract, is the visible part of it, that is the nonprofit and the ministries that we do. Foundations really addresses that. And then the second stage of what we planned is something called the Society of the Temple, which is much more of the mysticism. And then with that mysticism, that's what the 3 Rays book, the first one, is about. We've got a 9-year program based on the 3 years. That's the 3 Rays. That's a modular program. And so we need sort of minimum levels in the mystery school, so we know you have the background for it. But the idea is really growing the mystical body of witchcraft literature. So that's the Society of the Temple. So I actually wanted to do a sequel to Foundations of the Temple called Society of the Temple. And then the third stage is much more about the art and the culture, and part of the growing, as we grow in membership, having more, like, for lack of a better word, guilds of particular skills and cultural aspects that aren't necessarily classes and aren't necessarily, set with those types of structures. And I want to call that the Fellowship of the Temple. So eventually there'll be 3 books in
Nice.
that series. So maybe there'll be a 20-year anniversary edition of Foundations, but we got a little time to worry about that. Honestly, I've had my fill of working with anniversary editions of things. Next one to come out is the anniversary edition of Gay Witchcraft, which I'm very happy about. It's part of the Wiser's Classic series. It's going to be coming out in February. But going back to things you wrote 20 years ago is a weird thing, you know?
I heard that you was doing a community center project. How is that coming along?
It is slow, I'm sad to say, because the way the world has turned and the way construction materials go up and the way I had a very naive hopes at the beginning, and not that we didn't have good information from the people we spoke to. And originally we bought a property, so I'm hoping soon, within the next 10 years or so, the property will be paid off with. And if the property's mortgage is paid off, then I'm happy and I feel like I will have done a service to the community. But my real goal is to, once the property is paid off, and to have enough in our funds to build the community center. Our original vision on this property, it's an amazing Victorian house with a cottage and a barn. And in talking to all well-schooled people about construction and building permits and things like that, the plan was to convert the barn to a community center. But once we really had the engineers go over with the full proposal, which was a bit more money we had to put down than we initially had when we bought the place, to be able to put in heat and light and air conditioning. And it's an old barn, but it's not historic. So to make it handicap compliant, that for the town as a church, we'd have to have an elevator put in, which was an expense we were not thinking about. And the different systems and safety systems that are out there. So to do all the things that we want to do, we're probably gonna have to tear down most of the barn and expand the footprint a little bit and rebuild it to look like the barn, but to have all the modern things in it and the modern safety features in it, which would be less expensive than having to retrofit the barn as it is now. But it was levels of construction we didn't necessarily anticipate when we first started. We first got here, and the town has been an interesting experience. This is the town I actually grew up in. So it's kind of funny to kind of come back, and my family is here and everything. They've embraced the letter of the law of a witchcraft temple in town. So to be able to open even just the house to classes and to have everything here, we had to have a very professional grade parking lot put in with lights and all of that type of good things, which so before we could open, but after we bought the place, that was at the time, and this is probably around 2012, was about $70,000 that we didn't plan on top of the construction of the community center, because we thought, like a lot of places around here have dirt parking lots and simple places, but that was not the letter of the law for a church. Some things have worked out really well as a church as opposed to a business. There's certain caveats you get, but even having the level of fire safety within the house for opening up a room or 2 rooms to the temple is pretty extravagant. We have to be wired into the fire department of our town, and if a smoke alarm goes off, they come out. So we have to be careful when we're cooking here, because the founders also live here to be able to cover the rent and cover the mortgage. So it's an interesting take on expenses that you don't quite know until you're there. And even strangely enough, things like water backflows. The different churches are charged to have water backflow safety systems, which I didn't anticipate we'd have to put into a residential house just to open up 2 rooms. But here we are. So we've got those done, and I'm confident we'll get the next stage done. It's going to be a little longer than I anticipated when we first started. I'd hoped that we'd have been constructing by now. But also the world kind of got a little weird and, difficult to navigate for a few years. So I'm hoping we can get back on track soon.
All right. And Nico, the floor is yours.
Let's see. Is there anything today that instills the same sense of awe and excitement for you when you experienced the early days of exploring witchcraft?
Those early days are so magical, aren't they? Because I think it just blows your worldview of how things are. And I think I feel like I was very privileged to kind of come into this in a really weird, wonderful time. Like, I started in the early 90s before the big explosion of Wiccan witchcraft on TV. I can remember finishing my training, and then soon after that, the Craft movie came out, and we're like, "Oh, that's true. That's not true." You know, like kind of going through all that. Who knew it would blow up in the way that it did? And there was such an excitement. I think, being close to Salem, Massachusetts, and getting to learn from such kind of amazing people who are larger than life, like Laurie Cabot. And my first Samhain was on Gallows Hill and had crazy TV crews, and it was the anniversary of the Witchcraft trials at that time, and there was just such a level of excitement, and not that it was new for them, but the newness for me, and that stage of getting accepted out in the world. It was the mix of growing more safe to be a little bit more public about it, yet you still felt like you were joining a secret society that was going to reveal the secrets of the universe to you, and they sort of do. So that was really, really magical. I would say as I grow older, the deeper community experiences I've had have been the most exciting. I've also been privileged to travel the world and go to different festivals and teach. And sometimes I get to witness some amazing communities do things I've never seen before. And sometimes I get to offer things that I've done or participate jointly. As time has gone on, seeing much more deep invocatory practices where people are possessed by the gods, or the gods come through in really authentic ways, because I'm a doubter about things. So when people say things like that, I'm like, oh, is that real? And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But seeing some really powerful, genuine things kind of come through have been really amazing, and being able to participate in those things. We now do a large invocatory ritual every August 13th here in New Hampshire for Hecate. And that's been pretty profound. And in those rituals, I don't run the ritual. I tend to be an attending priest to one of the oracles. And that has just been so exciting, because it's just such a role of service, literally, to the goddess. And just to be able to shepherd that high priestess through the process of preparing their body and taking care of them afterwards, and taking care of people come up in that ritual to ask the goddess questions. So there's a little bit of private time with the goddess, and you're caring for the community member, and you're caring for the priestess, and you're honoring the goddess. And I'm fortunate enough that sometimes I didn't ask the first couple of years we did this if the goddess had a message for me. And I remember the priestesses, possessed and veiled, and obviously not her personal self, just grabbing me by the throat and being like, and I have to tell you something. And I was like, oh, okay, the goddess is speaking to me. It wasn't meditative. It was so visceral. It was a very profound movement for me. So I think that's really exciting too. And I love to help people have those experiences too.
That's awesome. So I know you kind of mentioned like Laurie Cabot. Who would you say are your two biggest influences that you've had in witchcraft and learning the practice and the ways?
In terms of living teachers, like that I met with physically, that aren't just through books, I would say my two biggest. Well, I would say that, and I've enjoyed their books as well, but probably the two most profound personal relationships I've had. It's hard to narrow it down to two, but there was.
You can add more if
My
you
mentor, who was a wonderful door opener, a wonderful woman named Lynn, who led me to Laurie Cabot. And Laurie Cabot, I've probably learned the most of how to live and how to be and how to truly embrace a magical life. I think she embodies that fully. And I think it's interesting, because I think when you do this type of work, everybody sort of wants to be your friend. And so when I first met Laurie and I first studied with her, it was no shadow of a doubt I was not her friend. And we were not going to be friends. And it was very clinical, like, here, take the class, and you're done with the class. And I like you, now go away. As I got more in my work in the world, and in community, I was invited to teach back at her shop when she had a shop at the time. And then we've worked on some projects together, and I've been able to have a really wonderful personal friendship with her since then. And it's been interesting. I used to joke with my mother, who came into witchcraft with me as well. And at the time when we're learning things in Salem, some things seemed a little alien to us. Like, why did you do it that way? Or some of the politics and social standings and things between people just seemed a little weird to us. And then as the time has gone on, I'd often catch myself saying, every day I understand Laurie Cabot just a little bit better, because you don't know what you're subjected to as a public witch until you are. And now I sort of get it. So she's been really wonderful, and I get to see her fairly often now, and still maintain that friendship. And so that has been a treasure in my life, both the teachings and what you learn through the friendship. I would say the other one is most likely Raven Grimassi. I was really, really honored to have a friendship with Raven. I loved his books before I met him. And I got to meet him really just before I became a well-known author. He came out to a book signing out here in New Hampshire, and I got to go to it. We chatted a little bit. And then in my first book tours and big author events, he and his wife, Stephanie Taylor, really took me under their wing. And my first really big tour on the West Coast ended at their house. They took me in and they kept me for a couple of days to kind of recover before I went back home. And they drove me around and brought me to the shops I'd be doing in Southern California. And they were just really gracious hosts. Then they moved out here, out to Massachusetts. So they were about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours from me. So I got to see them fairly frequently and spend time in their home and do some private study with him. And just in the learning how to be an author and a witch in a different way from Lori. And how to kind of be old world occultist in that way. And he definitely had some different perspectives because he's coming from different traditions, and also spent most of his life living in California, which is a very different culture to New England. And but just really, really treasured my time in the flesh with Raven, and I treasure my time in spirit with Raven still. But in the flesh has been, really privileged time of just his humor and his warmth and his magic and life experiences, both as a witch and just as an older mentor in America. He grew up in the 60s and I came to age at that time. So I've heard some wild stories.
We had Raven and Stephanie a couple of times for Pagan Pride, and we got to know them really well because, we ate dinner with them and everything. And yeah, Raven was, oh man, he was just one of a kind, funny, intelligent, just, he was great. He was great. And Stephanie, same thing. She was funny. I mean, I love them both dearly.
Too. Me too. I still see Stephanie quite often, so I'm glad she's still in the area and we still have our friendship.
They both have definitely, I think, even just in my personal practice, I went so far within the Cabot tradition, and then with them being sovereign, it was a moment where I had to really do that reflection inside and be like, okay, I have to kind of stop and not progress so further, because I grew up in a coven and my family's practice is very near and dear to me. And it was that moment where I'm like, okay, well, but there's so much from both of their teachings, from Lori's, that really helped me get deeper into my ways, Alpha. And then when I read your book, Instant Magic, I had this whole moment where I was like, oh, I can see the influence. I can see how things are going through it. It was such an aha moment for me. And then with Raven, just I feel like he is a heavy influence on my spirituality. He really helped me connect with the gods and the goddess in a deeper way, to kind of put it simply. But it's amazing to see that that they're also influencing so many others.
Yeah, I think what Raven brought to me, I think Lori was so much about the psychic awakening, and Raven really brought the mystery tradition. And that was really helpful for me because I think he helped me understand kind of those universal moments of gnosis and how they fit into witchcraft.
Definitely.
Nice. So where do you see yourself, the temple and the temple tradition, in 5 to 10 years?
I would like to say continuing onward. My goal for the temple is for it to not be so focused on me. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that because we've got lots of other teachers. Although I run the online school, our hope is to have teachers in many different places and people have access to those teachers. So we have so many teachers right now. We're doing our first teachers retreat this summer. So it'll be sort of a gas to have everybody, who teaches come together and have us talk about what are the challenges and additional learning we can offer each other as teachers. So that's the first. And we probably won't do it every year, but we'll maybe do it every 3 or 5 years just to kind of bring the teachers together for that. We're doing, larger events like Temple Fest, which is our annual festival in the beginning of September. And I have so little to do with it. I'll speak and I'll do a keynote and I'll do one of the rituals or something like that, but to know that I don't have to manage it all and I don't have to be the pivot person to invite everybody. Like it's a community thing. If something should happen to me, the community would survive and would continue onward. And I'm loving to see more people in the community bring their own teachings in the context of our community. So we have amazing teachers who are adding their own gnosis in the context of what we do, but they're not mimicking what I'm doing. They're doing their own thing. So we have an amazing priestess, high priestess, who's also our Libra lead minister. So she does a lot of the conflict mediation, named Deborah Stellhorn. And Debbie does a lot of things with what we call the witch soul, kind of the oversoul of witchcraft. And right now, her and I are co-teaching a class on healing the traumas of the witch soul. So it goes back to all the trial persecutions of the witches and things like that, and what some people today call that witch wound. We have another wonderful high priestess from England named Karen Ainsworth, and she's been doing a lot of remarkable things, but her two primary things, she teaches probably the most popular class in the temple, sometimes some years more popular than anything I do, which I think is a great testament that somebody can be more popular than I am in the temple. She does a class on kitchen witchcraft, kitchen witchery, and just does this amazing job with it. And it's just so beautiful how she presents things and weaves myth and story and meditation into it along with food. And she's also this year doing a class on what we call the 9 witches. And she has this vision of the archetype of the 9 witches showing up in different locations. So she's doing the 9 witches of Britain. And she hopes someone in America in the temple will do the 9 witches of America and the 9 witches of Scandinavia and the 9 witches of Greece and things like that. But she's taking historic figures from Britain and applying the archetypes of what we look at as the 9 witches to it, which is a teaching from the Society of the Temple. So she's taking that totally in her own direction. And we've got my fellow co-founder and my partner, Adam Sartwell, is doing a year-long class on Hecate and how Hecate factors into the witch soul and what we're doing. So we did a year-long in person here, and now he's going to be repeating it online for our general communities. And so I'm just really loving, I love all the things that I do, but I'm really loving seeing the community come together and share their vision and have my hope for it always was having a container to kind of, and I don't mean in a way to limit it, but having some type of matrix in which not just my teachings could live and be shared, but other people's teachings could live and be shared. And I think some traditions get calcified around their founder, and then they can't change because the founder's no longer with them, and people don't want to move from it. And I really want to model something that's living and breathing and changing. My teachings change, but also that they can be added to, and other voices are just as important, and people will take it on and do different things with it as time goes. There's a core to it, but through that core, things can grow. So I hope we have our community center. If I had, more money than I knew what to do with, I would like to create a witchcraft village. That is my full-on goal, to have some place that's not connected to the persecution of witchcraft, and a place that can be a cultural center that would have a blacksmith and herbalism and a retreat space and a large, big stone circle and things like that. But I don't know if that's in my plans this lifetime, but maybe it will be. But that's sort of my vision as time goes on for the community, to kind of create physical retreat community space where we can live in community together. Not quite a commune, but I'm thinking more like a artistic kind of enclave where people can come in and do a retreat, and then not necessarily live there full time, but have that kind of space where the culture of witchcraft can grow.
My husband just said, he goes, I moved there. He goes,
Excellent.
we would move there.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any big or exciting plans that's coming down the road that you might want to share with us all?
I would say the biggest things are, I'm hoping post temple anniversary edition stuff. I've got a bunch of books in the pipeline that are done. I just need to get into production. So I mentioned before, I have a book on Caradwyn and alchemy. It's called The Goddess and the Cauldron. So I'm hoping that will be out next year, and it's a pretty big book. Following that, I've got a book called The Sabbatic Visions, which actually took some classes I did during COVID times. And I ended up doing different shops and doing visionary sabbats because we couldn't gather in person. And I guess I was naughty about it. I was very heretical about it. So I was looking at weird kind of tradcrafty subverting Christian imageries and things like that at that time. So I wrote a whole book about that and how that plays into witchcraft. So I'm sort of excited about that. So we even use some things like Easter motifs or Epiphany motifs in the Sabbats. And that was really fun to work with and to bring people through and get their feedback on. And then I have the really big thing, which probably won't be out to 2026, is I have a 2 large volume set coming out called The Witch's Soul. That relates to the 3 soul model, and then it gets into the complexities of the 9 soul model and initiation through the soul and what all those things mean. From a lot of it has a lot of alchemical perspective to it. So that just came back from the editor, and we're working on the art for that. But it's such a big project, it probably won't be till 2026. It'll be 2 big volumes.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah,
Very interesting. Very. I can't wait for that to happen. That would be great. It'd be great to add that to my collection too of your books. I have all the books of yours. So
thank you. Yeah, the beautiful part of going kind of into independent publishing and with my new publishers, Cauldron Publishing, which originally was supposed to be part of the Temple of Witchcraft, but for IRS reasons, we had to kind of separate them out for the 2. Is that now you don't have to worry about the media waves of what witchcraft is popular. You can write the thing that you want to write and be true to your vision. So I don't have to worry about what's going on witchcraft TikTok or Instagram or anything. I can just do my thing.
Yeah,
that's good. Very good.
And my book list keeps growing and growing. Thank you.
I have a whole bookcase back here. This is my to be read bookcase.
I feel it.
It's part research material, part things like I really shouldn't buy another book because I could just look anywhere in my bookcases and have enough choice.
Yeah.
I still keep buying books.
Well, and I mean, I believe that's not, well, since this is more of a witchcraft related podcast, I mean, just even with the variety that is coming out right now versus when I really first got into studying and learning, and I mean, it's amazing, and the topics that are being covered and the knowledge voids that we're finding that we have. And I mean, don't even get me started on when you start venturing on like following the breadcrumbs outside of just like the mainstream witchcraft books that are out there, how like deep your path can go.
It's overwhelming.
It's astounding how much is out there, honestly, especially when you really open your eyes to it.
Oh yeah.
And the ability to find used and out of print books now. Before you'd find a reference in a book you liked and you'd have to hunt down. I had a list of books I'd travel with in my wallet to see if I went to a bookstore about, and now I'm like, oh, I can find that online, So.
Oh yeah. I had one for a class that I ended up down at the library the next town over, going through folklore archives and the Folklore Society, and they hadn't digitized any of their pamphlets on like folk magic from the late 1800s through the 19th century, but they had 7 or 8 boxes of these like continually printed pamphlets that had different folk magic tidbits in it. And I up until this year, I didn't know that my state had its own folk magic tradition, and it's practically extinct. But now that I know about it, I'm integrating it in my practice and then trying to redistribute the information. But I had to physically go down to a library because they're like, this is history, but we're not going to put it or digitize it.
Wow.
And I was like, it's so old school. I didn't go down there and go take notes. I loved it though.
Yeah.
But
it's amazing how many things are out there. Like I got to go through Raven's library after he passed, and just the level of newsletters that I've never seen that were based in California. Like there's such a rich lore out there. I hope a lot of it gets digitized and from all these places, for us to have access to.
Yeah. I'm thinking about asking Stephanie to come on and talk about Raven and even her projects too, because I know she was going to do a few things too. So hopefully, that's just remind me to put her on my list to contact.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Get a good word in for us, Christopher.
I definitely will. I should hopefully see her, if not before the holidays, just after. So I'll let her know.
And then just speaking of the holidays, I mean, I guess I never got a chance to thank you in a way. Your 13 days of Yule meditation. I took a Yule class, and this might have been when you were kind of on that sabbatical part. I think it was in 2020 or maybe 2021. I think it was 2020. And there was, I believe her name was Tessa, and she invited all of us in the class, if we were interested, to join in the meditation. And she invited us all to this Facebook group. And now, ever since then, it has become a yearly staple of mine to kind of predict and get messages on how my year is to come.
That is awesome.
And I had that kind of reminder of like, oh yeah, I have to check my planner and make sure that I check it every day, because pretty soon it's going to be on me and I'm going to have to get on it.
Well, we continue to do that through our social media. So if there's things you want to comment or share photos or things like that, we'll do it usually through our Facebook page, or we might be ambitious and do it through Instagram or something. But yeah, we'd love to see what people are doing with it. We're trying to do those types of vigils. We've got the Yule Vigil. We just did a 7-day one for Samhain for the 7 types of ancestors. Next year we have one planned for the 7 nights before Beltane. And in July we do a 9-day one for the 9 mothers. So those are some new traditions that are growing too. But I love the Yule one. We've been doing the Yule one since 2011, I think.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of Yule, our upcoming podcast episode is going to be us talking about our Yule traditions and how we navigate the holidays, and, celebrating mixed traditions with our Christian family members and everybody else, and how that all works.
Well, Christopher, I want to take a moment to thank you for coming on to our podcast and joining us this episode for our Cauldron chat. It has been a pleasure, and just to really learn a little bit more about your writing, especially in the early days. It was very interesting to find out, and then just to kind of see this side of you outside of a teaching environment.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun tonight. And just to kind of go back to that early writing part, if you're a writer out there, whatever you're doing, whether it's writing, art, music, don't let rejection stop you. If you feel you have something to do, just kind of keep on doing what you're doing and knock on the right doors, and you'll find the right opportunity when the time is right. But keep on doing it.
Thank you for saying that, because we are in the process of writing a book, and it's taking a long time because everything else gets in the way. But so that's good advice, because
write a little bit every day. It'll be done soon.
I do. very, very much so.
That's awesome. Well, good luck with it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me on. Have a wonderful Yuletide and wonderful Yuletide podcast for it. So I will see you guys later. Thank you.
All right, see you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a blessed you.
Take care.
You too.
Right.
And I am.
How he was talking.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Within the Cauldron video series that we're currently doing. Some of you may know us from our Facebook group that we originally started called Within the Cauldron. It was semi-monthly discussions, open to the pagan community, witches, and others, basically, anyone identifying underneath those umbrellas.
The Witchcraft TV network has a brand new show called Within the Cauldron.
Hello. Tonight we have a very special guest who happens to be a brother Cabot of mine.
You can join them in real time on their YouTube channel Within the Cauldron, or past shows right here on Witchcraft TV.
Nico, we have Chrissy here, and then we have our guest Oberon Cell.
Within the Cauldron, every Monday at 8 p.m. Keep it right here on witchcrafttv.online.